Have you ever felt like you were a ghost in your own home? Imagine standing in a room filled with the people who are supposed to know you best in the world, and realizing that if you simply stopped moving, if you simply stopped speaking, the world would continue to turn as if you were never there at all. That is the feeling I have carried since I was 6 years old. It is a quiet, heavy weight, like a smooth river stone resting in the center of my chest. Tonight, I am going to tell you how that stone got there. And I am going to tell you how, after 32 years, I finally started to let it go. My name is Liam. I am 32 years old now. And tonight, if you are lying in bed, the room completely dark, maybe rain is gently tapping against your window glass, or maybe you can just hear the quiet, steady hum of your bedroom fan, I am going to tell you a story. The real one. The one I have never said out loud until now. It is the story of growing up in a house where I was always the second choice, where my older brother, Ethan, was the son, and I was just the shadow that followed quietly behind him. Get comfortable. Pull the blanket a little higher over your shoulders. Let your eyes fall heavy. This story is very long. It is very slow. It carries a lot of pain. But I promise you, it also carries the quiet beginning of healing. The first time I truly realized my parents loved my brother more than me. I was only 6 years old. It was my birthday. A quiet Saturday afternoon in late spring. The air outside was starting to warm, carrying the scent of cut grass and blooming lilacs. If you closed your eyes, you could hear the distant, drowsy hum of a lawnmower from 2 streets over. You could hear the gentle rustle of the great oak tree in our front yard, its leaves brushing softly against the siding of our house like a rhythmic, wooden whisper. The late afternoon sun was pouring through the kitchen window. It cast long, golden, geometric patterns across the old wooden dining table. That table had been in our family for years. It was a heavy oak thing, scarred with the scratches and memories of 1,000 family dinners. I remember tracing the grain of the wood with my small 6-year-old finger, feeling every dent from a dropped fork, every smooth spot where the varnish had worn thin, waiting for the magic of the day to finally begin. Mom had baked a small chocolate cake just for me. The scent of cocoa and warm sugar filled the entire house. A heavy, comforting smell that made my stomach flutter with a nervous kind of excitement. It was the kind of cake with extra thick, dark fudge frosting. The kind of frosting that was so rich and sweet, it would coat the back of your throat. I would usually spend my afternoons sneaking into the kitchen, my bare feet silent on the cold, patterned linoleum floor, just to lick the mixing bowl clean whenever she let me. She had even placed 6 little blue candles on top. I had picked those candles out at the grocery store myself the week before. I remembered holding the small cardboard box in my hands the entire car ride home, treating it as if it were made of the most fragile, expensive glass. They were my candles, My specific shade of blue. My birthday. I sat at the head of the table. My legs were too short to reach the floor, so they swung back and forth, back and forth. The fabric of my corduroy pants swishing quietly in the still air of the kitchen. I was smiling so wide my cheeks physically ached. I kept staring at the cake, mesmerized by a little sugar flower placed right in the center, imagining exactly how that first bite would taste, how the cold frosting would melt against the roof of my mouth. I was so happy I could barely sit still. Then Ethan walked into the kitchen. He was 8 years old, tall for his age, with the same dark, messy hair as Dad. He had this confident, easy smile that always made adults laugh and pay attention to him. He walked with a heavy step, never worried about who he was disturbing. The room always felt smaller when Ethan walked in, as if he took up more than his fair share of the oxygen in the room. He didn't look at me. He didn't say happy birthday. He didn't even notice the 6 blue candles. He just looked at the chocolate cake and said in that effortless, carefree voice of his, "Mom, can I have the biggest piece? I'm really hungry after playing outside." Mom was standing by the sink, drying her hands on a floral dish towel. She didn't even pause for a second. She didn't tell him he had to wait for the birthday boy to blow out the candles. She didn't remind him whose day it was. She simply picked up the silver knife from the counter and cut the largest slice, the exact slice with the most frosting, the slice with the little chocolate sugar flower on top that I had been staring at for 10 minutes. She placed it on a white ceramic plate and set it right in front of him. She smiled, the softest, warmest smile I had ever seen her give anyone. She ruffled his dark hair gently with her hand and whispered, "Anything for my special boy." Then she cut a much smaller piece for me. No flour, no extra frosting, just a plain, ordinary slice from the edge where the cake was a little dry. She slid it across the wooden table toward me without really looking up. She didn't see the light go out in my eyes. She just said softly, "Here you go, Liam." I sat there. The small white plastic fork felt incredibly heavy in my hand. I didn't eat. I didn't blow out the candles. I just watched the blue candle on my slice slowly melt. The wax dripped down the side of the dark chocolate, making a little white puddle on the paper plate. In the afternoon sun, it looked like a small frozen tear. Dad walked in from the garage a moment later. He smelled like motor oil and cold metal and cut grass. He saw Ethan already eating the big piece of cake, patted him hard on the shoulder, and said loudly, "That's my champion right there, building up an appetite for the game." No one wished me happy birthday out loud. Not even once. The sun kept shining through the window. The golden pattern stayed on the table, but the warmth of the room was gone. I didn't cry. I was only 6, but I already knew that crying wouldn't change the size of the slice. I just sat there quietly in the fading light, taking tiny, slow bites of my cake. The rich chocolate tasted strangely bitter on my tongue. I swallowed around the tight lump in my throat, and I told myself a lie. I told myself that maybe if I was quieter, if I was nicer, if I just tried a little bit harder to be good, they would love me the exact same way they loved Ethan. I didn't know then that love wasn't something you could earn by being quiet. I didn't know that some people only have enough light for one person. I started keeping a secret notebook under my mattress that year. It was a cheap, spiral-bound notebook with a faded blue cover. I kept it hidden between the springs and the felt, a place where even Mom, when she changed the sheets, wouldn't think to look. Every night before bed, I would listen to the house. I would wait for the sound of the television to click off. I would wait for the heavy thud of Dad's boots as he walked to their bedroom. I would wait for the faucet to stop running. And then, in the perfect heavy silence of the night, I would pull out my pen. I didn't write angry words. I didn't have the energy for anger yet. I just wrote the quiet, honest truths that I couldn't say out loud. Today, Ethan got the big piece of cake again. Mom said I was a good boy for not complaining. Dad took Ethan to the stadium for the baseball game. I stayed home and helped Mom fold the warm towels from the dryer. I got 100 on my spelling test today. I showed Mom while she was making dinner. She said good, and then she turned away to ask Ethan about his soccer practice. I never showed that notebook to a single soul. I didn't want them to feel guilty. And more than that, I didn't want them to tell me I was being sensitive. I just needed somewhere to put the ache, so it wouldn't stay inside my ribs and grow until I couldn't breathe. By the time I turned 9, I had already memorized the unspoken rules of our house. They weren't written on the walls, but they were carved into the way we lived every single day. Rule number 1, Ethan comes first. Rule number 2, do not complain because complaining makes you a burden. Rule number 3, smile anyway, because a smiling child is an invisible child. I became the perfect, invisible son. I made sure my grades were always high. Not because I wanted the praise, but because I didn't want to give them a reason to be disappointed in me. I never got in trouble at school. I never raised my voice. I even started doing Ethan's chores on the weekends, raking the leaves he had forgotten, taking out the heavy trash bins, all so he wouldn't get in trouble and ruin the mood of the house. But no matter how much I gave, the love I received in return was always smaller. It was like they had a limited amount of light, and they spent it all on him, leaving me to navigate by the glow coming from under his door. The difference was in the details. It was in the way Mom ruffled his hair versus the way she patted my shoulder. It was in the way Dad's voice boomed with pride when he spoke of Ethan, but dropped to a low, flat tone when he spoke to me. I remember one summer when I was 10. The heat was thick and humid, the kind of air that sticks to your skin. Our family went to the lake for a week. The water was clear and cold, reflecting the pine trees like a mirror. Ethan wanted to learn how to water ski. He wanted to be the one behind the boat, jumping the wake. Dad spent every single day on that boat. I could hear them from the shore. The roar of the engine. Dad's loud, boisterous laughter. The way he cheered whenever Ethan managed to stand up for more than a few seconds. I wanted to learn too. I had been practicing my balance on the dock for days. I asked Dad quietly one morning while he was drinking his coffee. The sun was just coming up over the trees. He patted my head, a quick distracted motion, and said, "Maybe next year, buddy. Ethan needs to get it first. He's the athlete." I spent the rest of that week sitting on the wooden dock. The wood was hot against my legs. I watched them laugh together out on the water. I watched the spray of the lake rise up like diamonds behind the boat. I felt the sun burn my shoulders, and I felt that quiet stone in my chest grow just a little bit heavier. I started to believe the lie that I was the problem. I thought that maybe I wasn't interesting enough to be loved. Maybe I wasn't funny enough to make them laugh. Maybe if I was faster or stronger or louder, they would finally look at me and see a sun instead of a shadow. I didn't know yet that the ache I was carrying would follow me for the next 20 years. I didn't know that you can't earn a love that isn't being offered. Middle school came, and the ache didn't disappear. It just learned how to hide in the corners of my heart. It learned how to mask itself as independence. When teachers asked why my parents weren't at the open house, I told them they were busy with Ethan's tournaments. I said it with a smile. I made it sound like I was proud to be the self-sufficient one. But inside, I was still that 6-year-old boy, still holding a plastic fork, still watching the blue wax melt into the cake. High school was when the gap became a canyon. Ethan was a junior when I started as a freshman. In a small town like ours, Ethan was a god. He was the star of the basketball team. He was tall, fast, and had a charisma that felt like a physical heat. When he walked down the hallways, the air seemed to shift. People wanted to be near him. Teachers gave him extra time on assignments because he had a big game. And my parents, they were his biggest fans. Every Tuesday and Friday night, the house was a whirlwind. Mom would be rushing to finish an early dinner. Dad would be wearing his Team Captain Dad sweatshirt. They would head to the gym 2 hours early just to get the best seats in the front row. I joined the debate club. I joined the art club. I found peace in the quiet of the library and in the precise, logical flow of a well-constructed argument. I won first place in the district speech competition my sophomore year. I walked into the kitchen holding the gold trophy, my heart hammering against my ribs. Mom was at the counter, packing a cooler with Gatorade for Ethan's away game. "Mom, I won," I said. My voice was small, but hopeful. She barely looked over her shoulder. "That's nice, Liam. Put it on the shelf in the den. And honey, Make sure you help Ethan study for his history exam tomorrow. He can't play if his grades slip. I didn't put the trophy in the den. I took it to my room, and I put it in the back of my closet, behind my old shoes. That was the night I stopped telling them things. I realized that my successes were only valuable if they served Ethan's success. I remember my first real date. Her name was Sophie. She was in my English class, and she liked the way I analyzed poetry. I had saved up $60 from my job at the local bookstore. I bought a new button-down shirt. I bought a small bouquet of yellow daisies, her favorite. I told Mom about it that morning, mostly because I needed a ride to the park. She didn't even stop what she was doing. "Oh, Liam, we can't miss the playoff game tonight. Ethan is starting. It's the biggest night of the season. Can't you just go another time?" I didn't go another time. I walked 3 miles to Sophie's house in my new shoes. We sat on a bench in the park and shared a tub of ice cream. She laughed at my jokes. She looked me in the eyes when I talked. For 3 hours, I wasn't the second choice. I wasn't the shadow. I was just Liam. But when I walked home that night, the house was glowing with light. I could hear the laughter from the sidewalk. Ethan had scored the winning shot in the final seconds. The living room was full of his friends, and my parents were in the middle of it all, beaming, handing out sodas, telling the story of the shot over and over again. I stood in the doorway with the wilted yellow daisies in my hand. No one looked up. No one asked how my date went. I went upstairs, closed my door, and sat in the dark. I pulled out a new notebook. The blue one was full. This time, the words were sharper. "Dear Liam, you are not broken. They just don't know how to see you. But one day, you will find people who do. Graduation should have been a celebration. But for me, it was just the loudest silence I had ever felt. When Ethan graduated 2 years before me, it was like a national holiday. Mom threw a massive party in the backyard. They rented a tent. They had a banner that stretched across the fence, proud of our champion. There was a cake with a photo of him mid-jump shot. When I graduated 2 years later, I was the valedictorian. I gave the speech at the ceremony. I talked about the future and about finding one's own voice. I looked out into the crowd and I saw Mom and Dad. They were checking their phones. Ethan wasn't there. He had a summer league game. During dinner that night at a quiet diner, I told them I had been awarded a full academic scholarship to the state university. It meant they wouldn't have to pay a single cent for my education. Mom smiled, that quick fleeting smile, and said, "That's very convenient, Liam. It'll make it easier for you to come home on the weekends to help out. With Ethan away at college, Dad and I are going to need help around the house." That was the moment I realized. To them, I wasn't a person with a future. I was a utility. The summer Ethan left for college, they were devastated. They spent weeks helping him pack. They bought him a new car so he could drive back and forth. They drove him all the way to campus, stayed in a hotel for 2 nights, and cried when they said goodbye. When my turn came, 3 weeks later, Dad drove me to the bus station. The engine of the truck was idling, puffing white smoke into the humid morning air. He didn't get out. He just handed me my duffel bag and my bus ticket. Study hard, Liam. Don't let us down. Call your mother on Sundays. He gave me a quick pat on the shoulder, and then he drove away. I stood on the sidewalk of the bus station, holding my entire life in one bag, and I watched his taillights disappear. I cried for the entire 3-hour bus ride. I sat in the back, pressing my forehead against the cold window. I watched the trees blur into green streaks. I wasn't crying because I was leaving. I was crying because I was finally, truly, alone. And for the first time in my life, that thought didn't just hurt. It felt like the beginning of a breath. The 3-hour bus ride to the state university was the longest 3 hours of my life. I sat in the very last row, my knees pressed against the back of the seat in front of me. Outside the window, the world was a blur of gray highway and dark green pine trees. I watched the rain streaks race across the glass, little droplets of water joining together to become heavier, sliding down until they disappeared into the metal frame of the window. I felt exactly like those drops of water, small, heavy, disappearing. When I arrived at the campus, there were no parents waiting to help me carry my bags. There was no celebratory dinner at a local steakhouse. There was just me, standing on the cracked pavement of the bus depot, holding a single duffel bag that contained everything I owned. I walked 2 miles to my dorm room, the straps of the bag digging into my shoulders. A physical pain that was almost a relief compared to the hollow ache in my chest. College was supposed to be a fresh start. But when you have spent 18 years being invisible, you don't just wake up one day and know how to be seen. I moved through my freshman year like a ghost. I went to my classes early. I sat in the front row. I took meticulous notes in a new notebook. This one wasn't for secrets, but for typography and color theory. I found a job in the campus library, shelving books in the quiet, dusty basement where the air smelled like old paper and vanilla. I liked the basement. The books didn't ask anything of me. They didn't compare me to anyone else. During those 4 years, I went home for the holidays because I thought I had to. I thought that maybe, if I showed up with a 4 GPA, if I showed them the awards I was winning for my graphic design projects, the light in the house would finally shift toward me. But it never did. Every Thanksgiving, the story was the same. Ethan would come home from his university, smelling of expensive cologne and success. He had dropped basketball to pursue a degree in business, and Dad acted as if he had personally conquered Wall Street. The dinner table was a stage for Ethan's stories. He talked about his fraternity, He talked about his internships. He talked about his plans to buy a condo in the city. I would sit there, passing the mashed potatoes, clearing the silk from the corn, filling the water glasses. I was the stagehand once again. One year I tried to speak. The words felt like dry crackers in my mouth. I won the Dean's Award for my senior portfolio, I said during a brief lull in Ethan's conversation. Mom paused, her fork halfway to her mouth. She gave me that quick, distracted smile, the one that never reached her eyes. That's wonderful, Liam, truly. Ethan, tell your father more about that firm in Chicago. Did they offer you the signing bonus? I looked down at my plate. I didn't try to speak again for the rest of the meal. I realized then that my parents didn't dislike me. They just didn't have any curiosity about me. I was a background character in the epic poem of Ethan's life. After graduation, I moved to the city. I found a tiny studio apartment that smelled faintly of jasmine tea and old wood. I started working at a small advertising agency. I worked long hours, burying myself in grids and hex codes and the perfect placement of a logo. I was good at my job because I had spent my whole life paying attention to the details that everyone else missed. And then I met Daniel. We met at a coffee shop on a Tuesday morning when the rain was coming down in sheets. He accidentally took my oat milk latte, and I was too shy to say anything. I was just going to walk out and let him have it. I was used to giving things up. But he noticed. He saw the name Liam on the cup, looked at me, and ran out the door into the rain to find me. Hey, you're Liam, right? I think I have your drink. He was soaked to the bone, laughing, holding out the warm cup. He had the kindest eyes I had ever seen. They weren't looking past me. They were looking right at me. Our first few months of dating were a series of quiet shocks for me. I didn't know how to handle someone who asked me what I wanted to eat for dinner. I didn't know how to react when he told me he was proud of a project I had finished. The first time he bought me a gift, a small hand-carved wooden bird for my desk, I cried. Not because it was expensive, but because he had remembered me saying I liked birds 3 weeks earlier. He had listened. He had seen me. One night we were sitting on his sofa, the only light coming from a small lamp in the corner. The room was filled with the soft sound of a jazz record spinning on the turntable. Daniel reached over and took my hand. Liam, he whispered, why do you always apologize when you ask for something? I didn't have an answer. How do you explain to someone that you spent 18 years apologizing for taking up space? How do you explain the 6 blue candles? How do you explain the red fire truck? I don't know, I said, my voice trembling. He pulled me closer, resting his chin on the top of my head. You don't have to be small here, he said. You're the biggest thing in my world. I wanted to believe him. I tried to believe him. But the stone in my chest was still there. It was smaller, perhaps, worn down by the tide of his affection. But it was still there. When we decided to get married, I had to call my parents. It was a Sunday afternoon. The sun was hitting my apartment floor in those same golden patterns I remembered from the kitchen table. Mom answered, "We're getting married, Mom, in October." There was a silence on the other end of the line. A long, hollow silence. "Oh," she said finally, "that's lovely, Liam. Let me check the calendar." Ethan mentioned he might have a conference that month, and we'd hate for him to miss it. I closed my eyes. I leaned my head against the cool glass of the window. The sun was warm on my skin, but I felt a sudden familiar chill. "It's my wedding, Mom," I said, my voice steadier than I expected. "I hope you can make it, regardless of the conference." They came to the wedding. They sat in the second row. They smiled in the photographs, looking like the perfect, supportive parents. But during the reception, as I stood near the buffet table, I heard it. I heard Mom talking to my aunt. "Liam done well for himself," she said, her voice airy and light. "But Ethan, did you hear he just got headhunted by that firm in London? He's always been the one who really made us proud." I didn't drop my glass. I didn't make a scene. I just turned around, found Daniel in the crowd, and walked toward him. I realized in that moment that I could spend the rest of my life trying to outshine my brother, and I would still be standing in the dark. I decided then that I was done waiting for their light. I had my own, and for the first time, it was enough. 3 years into my marriage with Daniel, the phone rang at 4 o'clock in the morning. The sound was jarring, a sharp digital cry that sliced through the peaceful silence of our bedroom. Daniel stirred beside me, his hand instinctively reaching for mine in the dark. I knew before I even picked it up. In a family like mine, the only time I was the first person called was when the world was falling apart. It was Dad. His voice sounded thin, like a piece of paper that had been folded and unfolded too many times. "Liam," he said, "it's your mother, it's the cancer. The doctors, they say it's stage 4. It's moved into her lungs." I sat on the edge of the bed, my feet touching the cold hardwood floor. I looked at the way the moonlight hit the dresser, the same way the sun used to hit that old kitchen table. "Where's Ethan?" I asked. My voice was a flat, dull thing. "Ethan is in London," Dad whispered. "He's in the middle of a big merger. He says he'll try to fly back next week. But Liam, we need you now." I moved back into my childhood home 2 days later. Daniel came with me, carrying my bags up the stairs I had spent my life trying to descend. The house smelled different. It didn't smell like chocolate cake or floor wax anymore. It smelled like rubbing alcohol and oxygen tanks, and the heavy, sweet scent of dying lilies that the neighbors had sent. For the first time in 30 years, the house didn't revolve around Ethan's shadow. It revolved around a small, hospital-style bed set up in the center of the living room. And for the first time, I was the one who was visible. Because I was the one who stayed. I was the one who learned the schedule of her morphine drips. I was the one who crushed her pills into applesauce so she could swallow them. I was the one who sat by her bed at 3 in the morning, listening to the ragged, whistling sound of her breath, holding her hand, which felt as light and fragile as a bird's wing. Dad didn't know what to do. He spent most of his time in the garage, tinkering with things that weren't broken. He couldn't look at her. He couldn't look at the reality that the woman who had spent her life worshiping his champion was now fatting away in a darkened room. One Tuesday afternoon, the rain was coming down in a steady, rhythmic pulse. It tapped against the large picture window in the living room, a sound so consistent it felt like a heartbeat. Dad was at the grocery store. Daniel was in the kitchen, quietly washing the lunch dishes. I was sitting in the velvet armchair next to Mom's bed, reading a book of poetry I knew she liked. She opened her eyes. They were clouded now. The bright blue had turned to a dusty gray. She looked at me for a long time. Not through me. Not past me. At me. Mia, she whispered. I felt a sharp, familiar sting in my chest. In her confusion, in her medication-heavy haze, she had slipped. "It's Liam, Mom," I said softly. I didn't let go of her hand. "I'm right here." She blinked, and a single tear tracked through the deep lines on her face. "I know," she whispered, her voice a mere rasp of air. "I know it's you, Liam. You're the one who's always been here. And I'm so sorry." I froze. The book in my lap felt like it weighed 100 pounds. I waited for her to say more, for her to tell me she was just tired. But she kept going. "I failed you," she said. "I loved Ethan more. I don't even know why. Maybe because he was the first. Maybe because he reminded me of the parts of my father I missed. I saw the look in your eyes, Liam. Every birthday, every Christmas. I saw how much it hurt you. And I still couldn't stop myself. I was so proud of him that I forgot to be proud of you. The silence that followed was the heaviest thing I have ever felt. It wasn't the loud silence of my graduation. It was a soft, breaking silence. I sat there holding the hand of the woman who had spent 30 years making me feel like a ghost. And I watched her break. "You were always enough, Liam," she whispered, her eyes closing again. I was the one who wasn't. I didn't say anything for a long time. I just listened to the rain. I looked at the dust motes dancing in a stray beam of light that had broken through the clouds. I realized then that all those years I had spent trying to be better, trying to be louder, trying to be the champion, it wouldn't have mattered. The problem wasn't my life. The problem was her vision. Mom passed away 3 weeks later. The house was silent when it happened. Just the hum of the refrigerator and the distant sound of a car passing on the wet street. Ethan arrived the day before the funeral. He flew in from London, wearing a black suit that cost more than my first car. He looked tired, but he still had that easy, confident air about him. When he walked into the house, Dad hugged him and sobbed. "My boy," Dad choked out. "Thank God you're here." I stood by the doorway, watching them. I didn't feel the old ache. I didn't feel the need to disappear. I just felt a strange, quiet pity. Ethan was the special boy, but he didn't know the color of Mom's favorite pills. He didn't know the way she liked her pillows propped up. He didn't know the words she had whispered to me in the rain. At the funeral, the church was packed. Ethan stood at the pulpit and gave a magnificent speech. He talked about Mom's strength. He talked about her laughter. He talked about how she was his biggest fan. People cried, they nodded, they looked at him with such admiration. Then it was my turn. I stood up. My hands were shaking, but my heart was still. I looked at the rows of faces, at Dad, at Ethan, and at Daniel, who was smiling at me from the front pew. I didn't talk about soccer games or trophies. I said, my mother taught me how to love quietly. She taught me that sometimes the most important things are the ones that no one else sees. She taught me how to be strong in the dark. After the service, we went back to the house. The relatives eventually left. The food was put away. Ethan and I ended up on the back porch, sitting in 2 weathered wooden chairs. The sun was setting, turning the sky a bruised, beautiful purple. "I'm sorry, Liam," Ethan said suddenly. He wasn't looking at me. He was looking at the oak tree in the yard. I saw it growing up. I saw the way they treated you. I saw the cake. I saw the fire truck. But I was a kid, and it felt so good to be the favorite that I didn't want to stop it. "I'm sorry I let you be the shadow." I looked at my brother. For the first time in my life, he didn't look like a giant. He just looked like a man. A man who had lived in a different kind of prison than I had. "It's okay, Ethan," I said, and for the first time, I actually meant it. "I'm not a shadow anymore." The rain started to fall again, just a light mist. We sat there in silence, 2 brothers who had grown up in the same house, but in 2 completely different worlds. And as I sat there, I felt that stone in my chest. The one that had been there since I was 6 years old. Finally, slowly, begin to dissolve. It has been 2 years since we buried my mother. I am 32 years old now. I live in a house that I chose. A house with big windows that let in the morning light. I filled it with plants that I watered myself. I filled it with art that I created. And I filled it with a love that doesn't require me to be anyone other than who I am. The relationship with my father is different now. He calls me on Tuesdays. He doesn't talk about Ethan as much anymore. Instead, he asks about my garden. He asks about the new branding project I'm working on. Sometimes there are long silences on the phone. Silences where I can hear him trying to find the words to bridge 20 years of distance. I don't force him to find them. I just stay on the line. I let the silence be okay. Ethan and I are learning how to be brothers without a competition. He moved back from London last year. He realized that the champion life was exhausting. That being the son is lonely because everyone only looks at you for warmth, but no one ever really sees the person behind the light. We went to dinner last month. Just the 2 of us. We didn't talk about the past. We talked about the future. I looked at him across the table, and I didn't see a rival. I just saw a man who was also trying to figure out how to be happy. The little 6-year-old boy inside me. The one who sat at that kitchen table with the small plastic fork. He is still there, but he isn't waiting for the big piece of cake anymore. I've learned that the biggest piece of frosting doesn't make the cake taste better. I've learned that being invisible for so long gave me a superpower. It gave me the ability to see the people that everyone else walks past. It made me a better artist. It made me a kinder husband. It made me a person who knows that my worth isn't measured by a trophy or a shout of champion.